Melody was focused and driven, not chasing fame or controversy, but building stability, success, and something meaningful for herself and her family. Even when she joined reality TV, it was meant to show growth and balance, but over time things began to fall apart. Small issues turned into bigger problems, distance grew, trust faded, and what once felt like a partnership became pressure and conflict, all while being played out in front of cameras for the world to watch and judge. Through it all, she kept going, working, showing up, and caring for her children even while everything around her was shifting, because sometimes strength is just surviving. Eventually, she started asking herself if this life was still serving her, realizing there's a difference between being strong and being stuck, and for the first time she chose to listen to that feeling. She didn't announce anything right away or create drama online. Instead, she got quiet, and that silence became strategy. While people waited for her reaction, she was already making decisions, and then she stepped away, not just from situations, but from the entire cycle. At first, people didn't understand, but she didn't follow the usual pattern of returning for more drama. Instead, she chose peace. Once she left the noise behind, everything began to shift. Her focus became clearer, her energy changed, and she put more intention into her businesses, building slowly and carefully instead of reacting under pressure. She also found expression through music, not for fame but for release, and people connected with it because it felt real. Still, while others expected her return to television or a new deal, she chose a different path. She decided not to return to environments built on conflict or platforms that used pain for entertainment, instead working on private projects where she has ownership, control, and creative freedom. Not everyone understood it, with some saying she was running away, but leaving isn't failure when you've outgrown something, and she didn't leave because she was breaking, but because she no longer needed that environment. Over time, people around her noticed the change. She seemed lighter, calmer, and more grounded, and even her children could see the difference in her peace. Fans noticed it too, beginning to understand her journey not just for what she went through, but for what she chose after. Now she is focused on building a life on her own terms, quietly and intentionally, without needing approval from the outside world. And while people are still waiting for her next big moment, she may have already moved far beyond that phase because she is no longer chasing attention. She is building something real for her future, and that kind of transformation doesn't need an audience, just consistency. And as she continues on this path, the biggest change isn't something loud or visible, it's internal. The pressure that once followed her everywhere doesn't control her decisions anymore. She's no longer reacting to situations just to be heard or understood. Instead, she's moving with intention, choosing what deserves her time and what doesn't. The same world that once demanded explanations and emotional responses is now being met with boundaries and silence. And in that silence, she's been able to rebuild parts of her life that were always getting pushed aside. What people are slowly realizing is that this isn't a temporary phase or a short break from the spotlight. It's a full shift in direction. The version of her that existed only in conflict, confrontation, and constant public discussion is no longer the version leading her life. She's redefining what success looks like for herself, and it doesn't depend on ratings, reactions, or public approval anymore. Even her mindset around work, relationships, and visibility has changed. She's more selective, more protective of her energy, and far more focused on what actually brings her peace instead of what brings attention. And while that may not satisfy the people who are waiting for another dramatic chapter, it's exactly what she needed to move forward in a healthier way. So as time goes on, the noise around her continues to fade, but her foundation continues to grow. And in the end, that's what makes this shift so significant. It's not about disappearing. It's about evolving into a life that no longer requires constant explanation. And as this new chapter continues, it becomes even clearer that Melody is not moving based on pressure or public expectation anymore. She's moving based on purpose. The urgency that once surrounded her life has been replaced with patience, and the need to constantly respond or defend herself has been replaced with quiet confidence. She's not trying to prove anything to anyone now because she's no longer living in a space where approval determines her direction. What's also becoming more evident is how much she's rebuilding from within. It's not just about business growth or stepping away from television. It's about creating a life that feels balanced at every level. The choices she makes now reflect stability, not survival. They reflect clarity, not chaos. And that difference is what sets this phase of her life apart from everything that came before it. Even the way she handles her private world has changed. There's more protection around her peace, more intention in her decisions, and less tolerance for anything that disrupts her focus. She's no longer available for cycles that repeat the same pain, and she's no longer entertaining spaces that drain her energy. Instead, she's building routines, relationships, and opportunities that actually support where she's trying to go next. And while the outside world may still be catching up to that reality, she is already living it. The version of her that once felt constantly pulled into public conflict is no longer in control. In her place is someone who understands the value of stillness, the strength in boundaries, and the power of moving forward without needing to explain every step. So as everything continues to evolve, one thing stands out the most. This isn't an ending, and it's not a pause. It's a complete redirection. A life being rebuilt with intention, not reaction. And even though people may keep watching for signs of the old version of her story, the truth is simple: she's already written a different one. And as this journey moves forward, what becomes even more clear is that Melody is no longer defined by the environment she came from, but by the one she is actively creating. The noise that once surrounded her life is no longer the center of her world. Instead, she's building something quieter, stronger, and more intentional, something that doesn't rely on constant validation or public attention to feel meaningful. There is also a noticeable shift in how she carries herself in this new chapter. It's not about proving resilience anymore, because that phase has already been lived. Now it's about maintaining peace. It's about protecting what she has rebuilt and refusing to let old patterns pull her back into spaces she has already outgrown. That awareness alone has changed the way she makes decisions, the way she spends her time, and the way she defines success. And even though people outside of her world may still try to interpret her choices through the lens of the past, her present reality is very different. She is not operating from survival anymore. She is operating from clarity. That clarity has become her direction, her filter, and her strength. So while the story once looked like it was being written by chaos, conflict, and constant reaction, it is now being shaped by something else entirely: calm intention and personal growth. And that is why this phase of her life feels so different from everything that came before it. It isn't about escaping a story anymore. It's about fully stepping into a new one that she is finally in control of. And as this new chapter continues to unfold, it becomes clear that what Melody is building isn't just a change in lifestyle, it's a complete reset of identity and direction. The things that once felt urgent or overwhelming no longer hold the same power over her decisions. Instead of being pulled into situations that drain her, she is now guided by what strengthens her peace and long-term vision. There is a quiet confidence in the way she moves now. She doesn't rush to respond to outside opinions, nor does she feel the need to explain every step she takes. That space between her and the noise has become intentional, and in that space, she's been able to grow in ways that weren't possible before. Growth that isn't measured by public reaction, but by personal alignment and emotional stability. What stands out most is that her focus is no longer scattered between survival and performance. It's centered. She knows what deserves her attention and what doesn't, and that clarity has become one of her strongest tools. The constant pressure that once shaped her choices has been replaced with calm direction, and that shift is what continues to define this stage of her life. And while the outside world may still try to attach old narratives to her name, those narratives no longer fit the reality she is living. She is no longer in a phase of reacting to her past. She is actively building her future. A future that is not shaped by chaos, but by intention, discipline, and peace. In the end, what makes this transformation so powerful is not that everything became easy, but that she chose to move differently anyway. She chose to step out of cycles that no longer served her, even when they were familiar. She chose to prioritize peace over attention, stability over drama, and growth over repetition. And that choice continues to define everything that comes next. And as this new direction continues to unfold, what becomes even more evident is that Melody is no longer trying to fit into spaces that once defined her life. Instead, she is creating space for herself where she can grow without constant disruption. The urgency that once surrounded her decisions has been replaced with patience, and the pressure to constantly respond has been replaced with understanding that not everything requires a reaction. This shift also shows in the way she approaches her future. She is no longer building in a reactive way, based on what is happening around her, but in a deliberate way, based on what she actually wants her life to look like. That means choosing projects, people, and environments that align with her values, rather than ones that simply keep her visible or relevant in the public eye. There is also a deeper sense of control that comes with this stage. Not control over others, but control over herself, her time, her energy, and her direction. That kind of control is what allows her to stay grounded even when the outside world continues to speculate or create narratives around her. She is no longer moving according to expectation, she is moving according to intention. And while the past will always be something people reference when they talk about her, it no longer defines where she is going. The focus has shifted completely from what she went through to what she is building now. That change in focus is what makes this chapter so significant, because it marks the difference between being remembered for circumstances and being known for choices. So as this journey continues, it becomes less about the noise around her and more about the life she is carefully constructing behind it. A life that is steady, intentional, and rooted in peace rather than performance. And that is where her story is now heading, not backward into what was, but forward into what she is choosing to create next. And as this path continues to unfold, it becomes even clearer that the most important changes are not happening in public, but in private. Away from the cameras, away from opinions, and away from the constant pressure of being observed, she is learning how to simply exist without performance attached to it. That shift alone has given her something she didn't always have before, space to think clearly and move without fear of judgment shaping every decision. With that space, she is also beginning to experience life differently. Moments that once felt heavy or complicated now feel more manageable because they are no longer being amplified by outside noise. She is not carrying other people's expectations the same way she used to, and that has allowed her to reconnect with her own sense of direction. There is a noticeable maturity in how she approaches everything now. Instead of reacting quickly, she observes. Instead of explaining herself constantly, she steps back. And instead of allowing situations to pull her into emotional cycles, she chooses distance where needed. That doesn't mean she is disconnected from life, it means she is more intentional about what she allows to affect her peace. And even though change like this is often misunderstood from the outside, it is deeply necessary for her growth. Because what she is building now requires stability, not chaos, focus, not distraction, and consistency, not emotional fluctuation. That foundation cannot exist in the same environment she once had to survive in. So as this chapter continues, the story is no longer about what she escaped, but about what she is actively building in its place. A life that is not defined by reaction, but by design. A life where she is not pulled in different directions by outside voices, but grounded in her own choices. And in that way, her journey is no longer just about change, it is about ownership. Ownership of her time, her peace, her voice, and her future. And as this sense of ownership deepens, it becomes clear that Melody is not just rebuilding her life, she is redefining what it means to live it on her own terms. The decisions she makes now are no longer influenced by urgency or external pressure, but by a steady understanding of what supports her well-being and long-term direction. There is a quiet strength in this stage that doesn't need to be announced or validated. It shows up in how she protects her time, how she chooses her environments, and how she responds, or chooses not to respond, to situations that once would have pulled her back into emotional cycles. That restraint is not distance from life, It is a more grounded way of engaging with it. What also stands out is how naturally she has shifted into this new rhythm. It is no longer about forcing change or proving transformation. It is about living it consistently. The habits she is forming, the boundaries she is keeping, and the clarity she is holding all point toward a life that is being built with intention rather than reaction. And while the outside world may still interpret her story through older chapters, those interpretations no longer define her present reality. She is no longer